I know God exists because cutting-edge science proves it.
No, it doesn't prove it. I dislike interrupting others. Since it's a free country, we hope for a free world where everyone can express their beliefs. But I also think that sometimes it's good to clear things up. And when it comes to the idea that science could prove God, I think it's good to understand what science is and what it actually says. In this case, for example, we might understand that if science were to prove God, it would take away his ability to hide from us. Because God should be all-powerful. Or if we proved him, we showed that he exists. Yes, we showed him now forever. So somehow it's almost a philosophical impossibility. Why? Because science is a method. Science doesn't tell us what things are, what the world is. Science doesn't mean knowing that this is this, this is that, this is that. Science is a method of knowledge, a method that we discovered within natural philosophy, as it was called. First, science. And this method of knowledge has some very clear tools. In physics, the tools of knowledge are very well defined. We basically learned them in elementary school. Let's say we're studying a phenomenon that we call a physical phenomenon that is in nature. And let's say that physical phenomenon is light. How light travels and reflects and so on, right? Yeah. The physical quantities we associate with light waves, which are essentially electromagnetic waves, can be, for example, the electric field and the magnetic field. The electric field is a physical quantity denoted by E, which is a vector, and it is described together with the magnetic field, which is denoted by B, and is also a vector. Both describe electromagnetic waves, essentially light waves. Without physical quantities, we can't describe anything, nothing in nature. Before we describe something, before we say that something exists, if we want to prove it through science, we have to say what physical quantity it is. Not only that, where do I find it in the textbook? Okay, it can also be a new one and then be introduced in the textbook. But you need these physical quantities, after which these physical quantities are associated with certain units of measurement. You want to know if the electric field is larger or smaller. In the case of the electric field, the unit of measurement is volt per meter. Alright sir, it's 1 volt per meter, 2 volts per meter, a million volts per meter, and so on. And already, as you have heard, when we talk about units of measurement, we also talk about numerical values, meaning 2 volts per meter, 3 volts per meter, 4 volts per meter. So, when you hear someone saying science proves that, yes, you should immediately ask, okay, what phenomenon was studied? What are the physical quantities we use to describe that phenomenon? Are they in the textbook? Or maybe they're going to be in the textbook, right? What are the units of measurement for those physical quantities, and what are their numerical values? That's why I say, often I imagine that physics describes the world through a kind of clothing, and this clothing is essentially this collection of physical quantities that have associated units of measurement and come with values for those units. And pay attention, all sciences use the same method, not just physics. Physics is foundational in my view, but we also have chemistry, biology, and neuroscience, which use similar methods. And now we return to the original question. What would it mean for science to prove the existence of a God? Well, essentially, it means to describe him using these tools. So it should say, okay, how many volts per meter does God's electric field have if I describe him through the electric field? Maybe it's another physical quantity, maybe it's the magnetic field, and okay, how many Teslas does he have? God, right? What unit of measurement, if we prove the existence of God, okay, what is the unit of measurement we used in that demonstration? What is the value? You realize that we give it a form of God so deeply embedded that any person who is close to religion will recognize the absurdity of such an approach. Because that's not it. You can't prove God like that through some mathematical formulas, embed him in some physical quantities, and make a demonstration of him for eternity. Now the poor guy can't get out. The camera stopped. So this is the first point. If we understand this method of science, we will understand that it is essentially unsuitable, meaning it is inappropriate, to demonstrate the existence of a creator who essentially is above all these things. In fact, even more than that. And that's what we need to talk about now. We're talking about a personal creator. Yes, because the God of religions is almost always a personal God who essentially has completely different aspects than these units of measurement. Yes, physical quantities like electric and magnetic fields. I realize that may have sounded too philosophical. I hope you understood the essence, because I don't know what to say. You understand this essence if you work with science and you understand that this is the scientific method, yes, and then you automatically understand the limitations of this method as well. But let's get back to these ways of demonstrating the existence of divinity. And there are so-called demonstrations of the existence of divinity. I'm not going to discuss them. You can find them online, but I won't go into them because I wouldn't want to repeat now what others have said and what has been said very often. I would like to insist on one of my personal opinions, yes. And my personal opinion is that when people imagine they are proving the existence of God, they fall into certain traps, and they don't realize those traps. Many people say, okay, you scientists claim the Big Bang. This God, the world was created out of nothing, but it can't be created out of nothing. Or this means that God was there, so look, my God exists. But this also has a major problem. First of all, with this kind of demonstration, you would prove the existence of a creator God, not the God of a specific religion or, like in Christianity, the Trinitarian God. It has nothing to do with, let's say, a personal God. At most, it would be a creator God, maybe, yes. But on the other hand, science is misunderstood again because science doesn't say that at the Big Bang, the universe was created. Stephen Hawking expresses it beautifully. He says, I believe that at the Big Bang, the universe began. It wasn't created, it began. He distinguishes between beginning and creation. But stepping back a bit, what does physics tell us? It tells us that a few milliseconds after the Big Bang, actually, milliseconds or even less, like microseconds, nanoseconds, and so on. Yes, so a short time after the Big Bang, the matter we see scattered around was packed together. But notice, it doesn't say that the universe was a point. The universe could have been infinite from the very beginning, but the matter around us was packed together, yes. And it doesn't say what happened before either. So, science doesn't currently say what actually happened at the Big Bang. The Big Bang remains an extrapolation in science. We can say with quite a lot of precision what happened a few moments after the Big Bang, how densely matter was packed, how elementary particles formed, and other fascinating topics. But it doesn't say what would have happened at that moment, which we extend and call t equals 0. And there are theories in physics that say, well, hold on a second. There wasn't a Big Bang or creation-like beginning. Instead, a universe or multiverse existed before. There are also theories, but there are also theories, as Hawking says. Okay, I can imagine that there was a beginning, but there wasn't a creation. But all these are hypotheses. At the moment, science doesn't say anything at all about what happened at the time of the Big Bang. In short, even the Big Bang isn't proof of a creator God. And this, in fact, was actually discussed by Georges Lemaitre, who was the creator of the Big Bang theory and who was a priest. And when he came up with this theory, the Pope in Rome immediately started writing, look, this is proof of God's existence. And Lemaitre said very nicely, Father, don't mix things up. One is science, the other is spiritual matters. Keep them separate. And he kept them separate. And he didn't have any problems. The fact that science eventually suggests a creation, yes? Yes, you can think about it because you can. Okay, there was the Big Bang, but still there must have been a zero moment when things were created. That's just a suggestion. Then we have the design type arguments. It's called intelligent design in English. That is, you look at a certain thing in the universe and say, man, these things are just too well suited. These things are just too well suited. These things in the universe are just too well suited for life to appear in them. Because if they hadn't been well suited, life wouldn't have appeared. If, for example, the nuclear force hadn't been precisely suited to the electromagnetic force, atoms couldn't have formed and then people couldn't have appeared. I could talk for a long time about this argument of intelligent design, but I won't do it here. What I want to say here is just my personal opinion. Namely that this argument of intelligent design is always very misleading. It's very misleading because you're relying on a scientific argument and you know that science changes. And the best example for me remains Newton's example, who, when he discovered how the planets move around the sun, said Newton, "Well, hold on a second. These planets could have influenced each other over time and could have left their orbits. And the solar system would have disintegrated because of these gravitational interactions. Why didn't that happen? Did someone set the planets on the right motion in the beginning?" For him, it was an argument for intelligent design for the intelligent project because Newton was also a believer. It was an argument for the existence of God, but over time it was proven this argument wasn't good. Because we know today that the movement of the planets is aligned because they all formed in a protoplanetary disk, and so they align naturally. So in my opinion, these intelligent design type arguments are nice, we can discuss them, but they are often misleading. We have to be very, very careful with them. And the last thing I want to say is, yes, science does not disprove the existence of a God. And why am I saying this? I'm saying this not because science doesn't deal with these things, but because science has its limits. Yes, Ori, consciousness is one limit of science. And I have here a few videos, please watch them, in which I address this limit of science. The fact that science cannot explain, from a scientific point of view, what consciousness actually is. Why does subjective sensation exist? Or what exists behind the subjective sensation? Well, we exist behind the subjective sensation, yes. So science currently has a very big barrier. This is called a knowledge gap in English. Yes, a gap in knowledge. And this gap in knowledge, yes, it makes it possible for us to say that right now we don't know what consciousness is. We don't essentially know who we are. And just like we don't know why there is something rather than nothing. In the same way, if we don't know who we really are and how we exist and how this interaction of ours takes place, yes, through our sensations. How do they appear in this matter that seems to be devoid of subjective sensations? Yes. So as long as we have this knowledge gap, yes, then that means that essentially through science we can say very little about this part of knowledge. On one side, there's scientific knowledge expressed through physical quantities, units, and values. As I explained to you, yes. And on the other hand, there is subjective knowledge, what we feel, how we feel. And so science has not surpassed, at least until now, it has not crossed this threshold. It has not entered this subjective world, even if science says there is a connection between the two. Because we see, yes, when a neuron that is concerned with pain sends signals, then I feel the pain, yes. When I take medicine, that's this part of science, yes. That affects the way I am and the way I feel. It's clear that science says there are some bridges, but nobody knows what those bridges are that allow you to move from the physical world. Yes, in the world of subjective sensations, and as much as this world of subjective sensations behind which actually stands the self, yes. As long as this world is not currently being investigated by any form of science, we still don't know how to get there. Yes, then this world has the freedom of even a personal God. And we come again to the conclusion, yes, that science does not say that God does not exist. It's true that science makes us aware when we have thousands of religions, and we see that all these religions are different. They each say things that eventually contradict one another. Yes, science makes us aware. Man, out of so many thousands of religions, it's very unlikely that only one of them is completely true. Most likely none of the religions, yes, none of them can claim the ultimate truth in its complete form. I mean, absolutely everything it says there, absolutely all of it is true. It can happen that certain things are not true. And that's what I think is, let's say, the correct relationship between science and religion. Science remains honest with its scientific method. Yes, where we talk about physical quantities, units of measurement, measurement values, yes. And religion and faith in general work on another aspect of subjective sensations, on that other level we were talking about, yes. And we shouldn't mix them. When we talk about cosmic energies, let me give you another example.
Beyond the atom there is something. Namely, what follows, beyond the atom there is no longer substance. There is only field, there is only energy.
When people talk about cosmic energies as if they're absolute truths, those energies, if we're speaking scientifically, need to have their units of measurement and values provided. We need to determine the number of joules and the magnitudes of those energies. And again, let's understand that in physics, energy is not an ultimate unit, right? Energy is just a physical quantity that is ultimately described by some numbers that are conserved in a special system, in which the equations of physics described by what physicists call a Lagrangian, those equations do not depend on time, because in any physical system where we have the same equations over time, so that Lagrangian keeps the same form over time, it does not analytically depend on time. So, in any such equations, we will find a quantity that is conserved over time, and we call that quantity energy. So energy is nothing else, in physics, yes, than a physical quantity that we choose to describe a system, because it's easier for us to describe it, since we know that this quantity is conserved over time. But it's not, how should I say, a fundamental building block of existence, something esoteric and unknown or whatever, as some people claim. Yeah, of course, I forgot to hit record. What I said at the end was that I'm interested in this aspect because I've read a lot. Yes, I've read a lot about this relationship between science, faith, and religion. And if I do it, it will be a series, I don't know, I think about 6 or 7 videos, because both are very, very interesting, and not just interesting, I would say relevant. Because both science and religion, yes, play a role, attention, not only in society, but also in the souls of many of us. And so, what I want to say in the end with this video is that it's not good to mix the two realms. Essentially, that's all. We can't claim that science has proven that God exists, when in fact science hasn't proven such a thing. And it doesn't even have the tools to prove such a thing. It can't prove a creator God, even if it finds out that the Big Bang started from zero and came out of nothing. It doesn't have the tools to prove that behind that creation there is a creator. Even more so, it doesn't have the tools to prove that this creator is a personal creator. And with that, I'll stop here. If you haven't subscribed yet, you can do it right now by clicking this subscribe button. Don't forget about Patreon as well. There, I answer your questions privately on WhatsApp through video and audio messages. Until next time, I'm Christian Presura. You are cool. All the best. Goodbye.